Hello and welcome to the Heat Check podcast, the Miami Herald's Miami Heat podcast. I'm David Wilson. I'm joined, as always, on the other line by Anthony Chiang, our Heat beat writer here at the Herald. Anthony, what's going on?
What's up, David? I don't have to talk that much this week. I have Barry Jackson here. I have the
Yes, we've
cheat
got a
code.
special guest this week.
I don't have to talk as much this week, which is good for the
On
listeners.
the third line, we've got Barry Jackson, columnist at the Miami Herald, scoopster extraordinaire. For deadline week. It was the perfect week to get him on. We should say, I guess we're recording this Tuesday night. Obviously the Heat play Wednesday, so tough to squeeze it in on a game day. So if anything too crazy happens, maybe we'll come back and do a little addendum. But if something smaller move happens that we don't get to, that's the reason why. There was some news today though, and I guess that's where we will start. Dwayne Dedmon, as we have expected, gets traded ahead of the trade deadline, headed to San Antonio with the second round pick attached, to basically just free up some cap space and a roster spot for the Heat. Well, let's start there. What do you guys make of this move? It seems like obviously it's might portend things to come for Miami.
Yeah, maybe not, right? And we'll get to that later in this episode. But yeah, I mean, it was an expected move. I feel like pretty much anybody covering the team kind of expected the Heat to trade Dwayne Dedmon in some capacity before the deadline. It just made sense in a lot of ways. It opened up an extra roster spot, so now they have 2 open roster spots instead of 1. And more importantly, it opened up an additional $4.7 million below the tax line. So now they have $4.9 million in room below the tax line where they can either take in more money than they send out in a trade. They could use it to convert Orlando Robinson's two-way to a standard deal. They could use it in the buyout market. You can use it to sign a free agent that's out there that is not on a team right now. So it just opens up a lot of avenues for the Heat to kind of add to their roster. Whether it happens in a trade before the deadline, I guess we'll see. But it was a move that made sense.
Well, it was impressive, guys, that they found a team to take Dedmon off their hands. And as Anthony said, they now have the extra flexibility under that tax line. In a perfect world, they would have been able to package him with another salary, be it Lowry, be it Duncan Robinson, to be able to get a player that now perhaps they might not be able to get without having that extra salary, which fell in that sweet spot of $5 million. I guess the challenge they have now, and we'll talk about this more, obviously, over the course of the episode, is you have 2 large contracts with Duncan and with Kyle, but then if they cannot find a team who wants either player, then you're limited to basically $6 to $7 million if you were to trade Strus or Vincent or Yurtseven. And I think Vincent and Yurtseven would be unlikely because they need him. Strus they ideally would like to keep. So you'd have about $2 million in money from them, plus another $2 million, a bit over $2 million for Jovic. You could throw in Haywood Highsmith, get to about $6 million. And as our listeners know, you need, if you're over the cap, and if you're dealing with a team that's over the cap, you need to send back salaries that are similar in value. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but basically now, without having Dedmon's $5 million to aggregate in a trade, you're limited to either finding a player earning something similar to what Duncan and Lowry are, with Lowry obviously on the high end of that, over $25 million, or you're limited to basically a player in the $2 to $6 million range, because that's essentially all you have left if you don't want to trade Caleb Martin, who we all know is a value contract and a helpful piece on your team, and if Victor Oladipo vetoes a trade, because Oladipo is also in that salary sweet spot of about $9 million, where you could ideally combine him with someone else, be it Highsmith, be it Strus, if you had to get a player in the $11, $12 million range. You can't do that with Vic unless he were to approve a trade, because he has the right to veto one this year. So that's the only negative of the Dedmon deal, but generally it was a success because they found someone who actually would take Dwayne Dedmon off their hands, which is, of course, extremely helpful.
Are you surprised that they made this move then with 48 hours to work with until the deadline, that they didn't hang on to see if anything else came to pass?
That's what I was going to ask Barry, actually, and I've been thinking about this since the move was announced a few hours ago. Was the Dedmon signing obviously did not work on court-wise, right? As we all know. But the reason he was signed was to really trade that contract, the way it was structured with a non-guarantee in the second year. And you could argue it was to maybe package with a minimum salary to create more salary to bring back in a deal like you were talking about. Was that signing a failure even in that regard? Because you obviously didn't attach it to anybody, and you had to give up a second-round pick to get rid of it.
It was definitely a minor failure. It doesn't set him back
Yeah.
8 inches. But
No.
in retrospect, and I wrote this at the time last summer, instead of giving Dedmon a contract at 4.7, which left them up against the tax, I would have instead spent the money on a couple of minimum guys. I mentioned TJ Warren last summer. Of course, we eventually came to find out that he did not return to the Nets until December because of the injury. He's been healthy, some injured, some, but he has helped the Nets when he's been available. So I wrote back in August that if I had been the Heat, instead of giving Dedmon 4.7, I would have pursued 2 other players at the minimum, including TJ Warren and somebody else. So, yes, it was a mistake in retrospect. Ultimately, though, it didn't cost him very much, just a second-round pick in 2028 to dump him. Unfortunately, you couldn't pair him with something else to get a player in that $10 million range. And we'll talk about this during the course of the show, guys, but as you know, there are a bunch of players in that $10, $11 million range who would help them, like Dario Saric, we mentioned today, is a name on their radar. Obviously, Kelly Olynyk, we've talked about him. Jay Crowder, of course, is the poster child for players in the 10 million range. Dedmon's salary would have helped you get to that point, but it's pretty clear to me, tell me if you guys agree, that they must have concluded that we cannot package Dedmon with anything. I'm sure they exhausted all opportunities for all of these 4s that we've talked about, and they must have realized that it was of no value to them in achieving a trade. So ultimately, they gave Dedmon to the one team that could absorb his salary, that had the space to do it, and was nice enough to do it as a favor for the Heat.
Yeah, and to your point, Barry, if they're going to do anything significant before the deadline, it really comes down to if they could trade Kyle or Duncan, right? Because they have, 5 minimum salaries on the roster. They have 13 players right now. 5 of their minimum salaries. The 6th, Nikola Jovic, is on a cheap rookie deal. 7th is Tyler Hero, which we all know is very difficult to trade until July because of the poison pill. And then after that, like you said, it's either Jimmy, Bam, very likely not going to get traded, and then Kyle Duncan, and Victor has a right to power to veto a trade, and Caleb Martin, which is probably not going to get traded because you need him. So if they're going to do anything significant, it's going to have to include Kyle or Duncan at this point. I mean, it's hard to envision another way for them to get a rotation player back in any trade.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about Kyle a little later on because you guys wrote about him this week and where the Heat kind of stands in viewing his future. As far as how obviously the talk always around the deadline is going to be about the stars available, and like as of this very moment, it doesn't seem like there are any, but obviously I think everyone is keeping an eye on, well, obviously the Nets, because you never know in Brooklyn. I think Washington continuing to slide, and obviously has already made one move with Rui Hachimura. There's obviously some Beal. Damian Lillard remains kind of the white whale, but really does not seem like he is going anywhere. As you guys mentioned, the Heat, they have some valuable pieces. Some of those young minimum type guys are good, but I think probably better suited for like role players on contenders in a lot of ways. So the real asset they have beyond those contracts, and I think Duncan still has some value even at that salary, is the picks, the first round pick that they, I think the Heat fans who want to do something are probably willing to part with that pretty quickly, right? But what do you guys sense it would take for the Heat to move that piece? Does that require a major deal for a star or star adjacent player?
Barry and I have spoken a lot about this off camera,
Yes.
off Skype, all that. But I see both sides of it. Not to not to have a strong opinion. I see both sides. But I think I would lean toward not giving up the first round pick this year unless it brought somebody significant. And by significant, I mean like starter, like a starting level player. Yeah, starter. If it's a role player that can play as a seventh man, eighth man, or just gives you depth, I would not give a first round pick. And even as a starter, it has to be like an above average starter, not just somebody you know. I don't know if an example off the top of my head, but not just like a fill-in starter that you kind of is maybe better as a reserve, but you have to put him as a 4 because you have no other option. You want to move Caleb back to the bench. It has to be like an above average quality starter to get a first round pick, because those are so valuable these days, and you just don't know what's going to happen, right? This summer, whether it's Kevin Durant, whether it's LeBron James, whether it's Luka, right? Who knows how this Kyrie thing works out in Dallas? You know, for the Heat to stay in the game, they have to keep all their first round picks. They just do. And you could argue that they can't put together a package that would get Kevin Durant, even if they kept their first round pick, because they just don't have the assets to beat out other teams in that sweepstakes. But to have any type of chance, you need to keep those picks. And I would argue right now it's just hard, as wide open as the East seems. It's just hard to envision a mid-level type of player swinging the Heat season right now. It just seems like the Heat aren't that close to like Milwaukee or Boston.
Yeah, and it does feel like the market is kind of totally out of whack right now, and probably a lot of it still goes back to the Gobert. Like when you hear about what the Raptors want for OG Anunoby, and it's like multiple first-round picks. It's like, is OG? I mean, I know OG Anunoby's a good player, but like he's not an all-star. Like the market for now, I think, is out of whack. Where for a first-round pick, you're probably not getting what you want. Like the trade-off right at this very moment is probably not as good as it will be. Certainly in the summer. I don't think, and just the further away we get from that Gobert trade, that really like threw off the market. I think
the Heat also have to just ask themselves, like, if it's like, for example, OG you brought up, if you're gonna do a deal like that, they have to be pretty sure that that's the missing piece, right? That's gonna put
that's the move. That's the thing with whatever trade you use. That's kind of the move. Barry, what do you think?
Well, the first round pick is an interesting question. Anthony and I were talking about this off air today, as he mentioned, and here was a thought that came to my mind, which now has me leaning toward being willing to offer a first round pick. If you look at the stars available this summer, potentially, say you don't trade a first round pick, and then that would leave you with 3 available to trade this summer instead of 2. Would you reasonably think you'd be able to get Kevin Durant for a package of 3 first round picks, Tyler Hero, and cap filler? If you come to the conclusion that Brooklyn would not take that offer and that they'd get better offers like Jaylen Brown, among others potentially, then I don't necessarily see the necessity to keep that 3rd first-round pick available. If you do that exercise with other players who might be available this summer, Zach LaVine, is he worth 3 number ones in Hero? I don't think so. I certainly wouldn't do that. Damian Lillard, if he should ask for a trade, would 3 number ones and Hero be trumped by someone else conceivably? So even though obviously it's better to have 3 first-round picks as commodities to trade, I just don't know if you apply it to the players who potentially could be available this summer if it ultimately gets you that player, unless, here is the big unless the Heat should surprisingly make Jimmy Butler available this summer for a Kevin Durant type. Obviously, there are very few players you'd ever consider trading Jimmy for. But if the Heat surprisingly were to do that, then there is value in keeping that 3rd first-round pick, because it might be needed. Butler, 3 number ones for Durant, and something else, be it Joe Harris, something. Obviously, you'd need filler in there as well. But if you're keeping the picks with the thinking that you could get Kevin Durant merely for a package built around Tyler Hero, Nikola Jovic, whatever else you want to throw in there, I think you're probably kidding yourself. And that's no disrespect to Tyler, who's a quality NBA starting 2 guard. He's averaging 21 a game. But it's just acknowledging that there are going to be better offers, whether it's from Boston with Jaylen Brown, whether it's from Denver if they don't win a championship, make Michael Porter and others available. So as I went through that thinking today with Anthony on the phone, I came to the conclusion that holding on to that extra number 1, I don't think is as valuable as it might seem on the surface. So just to wrap this up, if you can move Lowry's contract, say, for example, to the Clippers and get 2 players who would be helpful, Norman Powell, who's Obviously, 17, 18 point a game score, shoots high from three, maybe a second piece, whether it's Robert Covington, Kennard, maybe Reggie Jackson's an expiring deal. If it allows you to move off the Lowry money, I would consider a first in that scenario because you're addressing shooting, obviously, whether it's with Powell or Kennard, two guys who are shooting 39, 40% on threes, and you're ideally getting a player who can play four as well. So if you sacrifice a number one, you'll still have two number ones you can trade this summer if you free up the OKC pick, which would require loosening the protections on that and making it non-lottery protected. So that's how my thinking has changed, guys, on this. I now am not as married to holding on to three number ones as I was before I started giving this more thought.
Yeah, that's a good point because it does feel like the Heat has kind of been hanging on to those basically since the Lowry trade. Like they've been hanging on and trying to find that one last piece, and it's hard to find when everyone's looking for it, obviously. But you also think of the Heat as this franchise that people want to come play for, and obviously it worked for them, like with Jimmy Butler. But Jimmy Butler was a free agent that offseason, and they traded. It was a sign and trade. Like there's only so many guys. I guess Beal is really the one guy because he has the full no trade clause where like he could basically force his way to Miami. We've seen Brooklyn with the way that the trade stuff was happening over the summer. They were not like kowtowing to whatever. Obviously, they ended up hanging on to him, but they were not just going to do whatever he wanted. They were going to look for the best offer. So it does make it a little bit trickier for the Heat than it has been in past years.
And one point I want to make off that, I think what's hurt the Heat more than anything, besides having $45 million spent this year on players who are not helping you with Larry and Robinson, really the other problem is pretty basic, which we all know. They need a superstar to say, I want to come to Miami. And it hasn't happened since Jimmy Butler. If Durant had said that, and if he had really held firm on his trade request, then obviously there'd be a decent chance Durant would be here. But he was happy going to Phoenix. That was every bit as much his preference as Miami and other teams. So what's killed the Heat is they have not had a star who has said, trade me to Miami. If they had that, then all of our problems would probably be solved.
Yeah, they have a very good track record of getting players who want to be in Miami to come to Miami. Even, obviously Oladipo, Kyle Lowry, like you said, Jimmy's the last star, but it just hasn't happened in the last couple of years.
Beal has been that guy for years.
Right, he's been like the one people have been pining for pretty much since the Giannis thing fell through, right? It was like Beal's coming eventually, or Lillard is the other one, right? But so far, neither of those guys have. Obviously, they're never gonna say it outright. But even like the people who are close to them and report on them have not let that trickle out.
Yeah, Barry makes a very solid point, and I agree with it to a certain extent. I've kind of held firm, and I guess I'm being stubborn with the fact that I don't want to trade the pick. But he makes a good point where it's gonna be hard for the Heat to win the Durant pursuit with an offer headline by Tyler Hero. Again, Tyler Hero is very, very good, but there's going to be, every player except maybe 10 in the NBA are going to be on the table for Kevin Durant, right? Like, there's going to be so much competition for him that you might hold on to those picks, and that might never come. Chances are it won't come to fruition. So, if you have a chance to make a trade that can make you, that you think can kind of take this team to the next level and really give you a chance in the East, maybe you do give up this year's pick, but I still would be, after that, I would definitely be very careful about dealing any more picks for the next, past this summer.
Yeah, to me, I think of whatever move you make if you give that first round pick up, because I think we all agree the East feels open, but they're a step behind Milwaukee and Boston right now. Although they've gone really, they played really well head to head against Boston in particular this year. You don't want to trade a first round pick for a guy who's just going to help you this year be slightly better and lose in the East Finals or whatever, right? Or lose in the second round. If you're giving up a first round pick, it's got to be someone who you think is helping you this year, but also helping as you move forward. Because this is not just a 1 year. It's not like this is the end of the road for this group. They've got to, until Jimmy Butler slows down and he's not really showing any signs of it right now. You've got a window here that spans multiple years.
And also, one problem you have is you no longer just have one need. You no longer just have the need for a 4, which we all knew coming into the season was going to be an issue. We also have what's turned out to be a major surprise, the need for more shooting. None of us expected, after they led the league in three-point shooting, that they would be one of the worst shooting teams in the league. So now not only do they need a 4, who ideally could back up Bam and play with him when Caleb is on the bench, but also someone who can shoot well. It might not necessarily be the same player. And if Lowry is going to be out a considerable amount of time in the second half or remain as ineffective as he has, you probably need another point guard as well. So all of these needs they have, they couldn't have anticipated. They viewed themselves probably as one piece away, and it's clear that unless the piece is a superstar who they're not about to get, then they're multiple pieces away from being on the Boston Milwaukee level, at least in my view.
Sure. Yeah, they need a 4 either to start or back up Caleb, and they need a backup 5, right? To at this point, Orlando Robinson has played well and he's kind of stabilized that in that role. But ideally, in a perfect world, you have a more experienced option at that spot, especially in the playoffs. They need shooting, like Barry said. They might, who knows what's going to happen with Kyle, right? We don't know the timetable of when he'll return. He's out for the next 3 games. The stats after that kind of in question. So they might need a point guard, right? I mean, it's just this team has so many needs, which again is another like factor in all this that the Heat front office has to think about is like, what move is worth making here, right? Is it worth to trade a first-round pick just to get off a salary? Do we think we're close enough where we could fill a couple of those needs, maybe with 1 guy or 2 guys, and we could use that pick and attach it to Kyle or another player on the roster? We could fill some of those needs and get considerably better. It's tough, they're on a clock right now and they have to make that call. And it's not an easy one because again, there is so much parity, and you could argue the Heat aren't far away. I wouldn't make that argument, but you could argue that they're closer than maybe it seems right now.
And also the question is, if you cannot move Lowry or Duncan without trading a first-round pick as a carrot, and if you determine that you don't want to trade a first-round pick as a carrot, then you have such limited assets in terms of salary to get a player, as we talked about. So then the question becomes this: do you just begrudgingly punt on the season, something they would never admit publicly, and just say, well, we'll stay the course with this group. We'll see if we get a favorable first-round matchup against Cleveland or maybe Brooklyn. If they're diminished now, hope to get into the second round and then reassess our team and do something significant this summer. They might begrudgingly have to do that unless they can miraculously move off the Lowry or Robinson contracts without giving up a first-round pick. And, of course, Andy Ellsberg is a magician. We've seen, obviously, the moves that Riley has made to make this team a champion 3 times and a perennial contender for the most part. But if they can trade Lowry or Robinson's money without having to give up a first-round pick for a deal, at least one of which is expiring, or for a rotation player, then that would truly be an achievement because of A, Lowry's diminished production, B, the fact he's owed $29 million next year, C, the fact that he has a knee injury, says he's out indefinitely, and 4, obviously, because Duncan has 3.5 years remaining on a contract that's worth $90 million, of which $80 million is guaranteed. So if they can move either player without giving up a first-round pick, that would be impressive. That's the uphill challenge they're facing over the next day.
Let's dive into the Lowry situation. You guys wrote about it this week. Obviously, and Barry, you talked to him, I think, out on the road trip too, of just kind of getting him to talk about, the situation where he, kind of knows that he's in some of these potentially down the road, maybe as soon as this week, maybe later on, potential trade chip here. What is the latest as we talk now, about 48 hours out, less than 48 hours from the trade deadline?
Yeah, well, Barry and I both reported about 2-3 weeks ago that the Heat weren't looking to trade Kyle Lowry, and felt pretty strongly about that. But since then, we both heard that softened a bit. They're open to trading him at this point, if there's a deal that makes sense, right? Things have changed in the last 3 weeks. Kyle has been kind of up and down all year, but he hasn't played in 4 of the last 5 fourth quarters that he's been available for. He did not have a good month of January. The Heat have been winning really over the last month without much contributions from him. So things have changed. We all know the Heat's tax situation next year. And if they can find a way to get off that money, right, it would make sense. Make a lot of sense, right? Where they either lowers the tax bill a little bit and also gives them flexibility to maybe bring back Max Strus, bring back Gabe Vincent, Omar Yurtsev, and just a combination of those guys using their bird rights. So, that's kind of latest what we've heard, that they're open to trading him if there's a deal that makes sense out there.
Now, Lowry's handled this professionally in terms of everything he said publicly, has not complained at all about not playing in the fourth quarter. But there is a potential really awkward landmine that looms that cannot be ruled out, and that's this. If the Heat plays really well with Vincent starting over the next couple of weeks, we know he's going to be out, Lowry, at least 3 games, possibly into the All-Star break, which would be 4 games. That wouldn't surprise any of us, obviously. And the Heat plays well in those 4 games. Does Erik Spoelstra, who has always put the team first, but has always been incredibly deferential to Lowry, does he make that incredibly difficult and awkward move to tell Kyle Lowry, I don't care that you've started 600 plus consecutive games. I don't care that you have borderline Hall of Fame credentials. You are coming off the bench. And does Kyle Lowry accept that? Or does Spoelstra throw up his arms and say, I can't be the one to bench Kyle Lowry. I know we're playing well with Gabe Vincent starting. We have to put Kyle back in the starting lineup because he is Kyle Lowry, but we'll just continue to sit him in the fourth quarter, which I'm sure is uncomfortable for Kyle, but at least it doesn't come with the stigma of being removed as a starting NBA player. And all 3 of us know that Kyle Lowry is an immensely proud player, has had a distinguished, decorated career, 6-time All-Star. Does Erik Spoelstra, who has made some very difficult decisions putting the team first in his career, make the ultimate difficult one in telling Kyle Lowry, you are no longer an NBA starter on our team? Now, this becomes an issue only if they don't move him this week, and if the team plays well with Gabe Vincent starting. That group of Vincent and the other 4 starters was decent against Milwaukee, outscored by 8 the other night, but they're plus 17 in very limited minutes together this season. So I'll be interested to see Vincent with the other 4 starters over the next 4 games, guys.
Yeah, and I mean, to that question, Barry, like all Erik Spoelstra has to do is say, Goran Dragic before you played as a 6-man, right? Dwayne Wade, the best player in franchise history, played as a 6-man. I'm not saying that's going to make it easier for Kyle or that would make him happy or, make him cooperative to that. We don't know, right? But there are examples, very recent examples of players comparable to Kyle, better than Kyle. Dwayne Wade, right, is at one of the best shooting guards in NBA history that have taken on that role and kind of flourished. So Erik Spoelstra could use that angle to kind of convince him. But we'll see. Right now we don't even know when Kyle's going to come back. We don't know, what's going to happen at the trade deadline. There are so many questions to be, that need to be answered before you even get to that point.
And Duncan's finger also wanted to point that out. Even though obviously there's interest in moving off that contract, there's no indication that he's imminently going to play. So moving that deal becomes even more difficult. They're in a very tough spot. And yes, you can say they created this because they signed Duncan to a deal, but I think most people at the time probably thought that was an understandable move because he was shooting threes at an historic rate the previous 2 years. And obviously the decision which they would do over is Kyle. If they had just picked the best available Kentucky player, right, Tyrese Maxey, as Anthony and I have talked about, I've made this point obviously to you repeatedly, and then developed Maxey instead of drafting Precious, not done the Lowry trade. Obviously, it's the ultimate second guess, but when you continue to invest in older players, their bodies are going to break down, and in some cases, you're going to regret those moves. And most of the older player investments that Pat Riley has made over the years, the majority of them have worked out. But this is the case of one not working out, and obviously one they'd like to do over.
So what would a potential, like a Kyle Lowry move look like, do you guys think? Would it, because obviously it's a big contract, like the kind of the appeal of that contract at this point is like it makes salaries match if you're trying to get a really good player who's getting paid that kind of money. Is that the only way that this happens? Like what are the potential Lowry paths forward here in terms of a trade as we look? Like, let's say specifically this week, obviously it'll be different if it gets to the summer, but for this week, if he gets traded, what does that move look like?
Yeah, it would have to be salaries in the 24 to 30 million range coming back to Miami. There's not a team left with cap space to absorb that kind of salary. And so you'd be looking at a team that wants a veteran floor leader, someone who accepts the fact that his knee might require him to miss a handful of games at a time, someone who values his leadership, his voice, his ability to still run an offense effectively, get a team into offense, and someone who thinks that maybe change of scenery will restore his shooting to past levels where he was a 44%, 38% guy on threes as opposed to now where he's just below 40%, 33% on threes. That's a lot to ask a team to conclude. And the only team publicly linked to Lowry so far, as everyone knows, has been the Clippers. I was told that there was at least one other team who has inquired about him. I don't know who that team is, but with the Clippers, it's an easy match from a salary cap standpoint. Just taking two salaries among Robert Covington, Luke Kennard, Norman Powell. They have about five guys who, if you have any combination of those two, would work for Lowry. The question is, what would be the incentive for the Clippers to do it at this point? Because of Lowry's health, they've been starting Terrence Mann at point guard. He's been adequate. He's obviously a different player from Lowry. The John Wall experiment has not worked out for them, even though he's still averaging 10 a game. So the question is, if the Clippers are unable to get Mike Conley, which will require a lot more inventory than getting Lowry, if they're unable to get Fred VanVleet, it would require probably multiple first-round picks. Do they say, we're good with Terrence Mann? Or do they say, we feel like pairing Lowry with Kawhi again, and obviously Paul George gives us a better chance to win a championship? To me, that's what it comes down to in terms of their ability to move Lowry.
And, I mean, if the Heat put in that carry of a first-round pick, right, and that type of deal,
right,
the Clippers can say, we could either give up picks to get Conley, or we could get Kyle and get a first-round pick back, first-round pick as well. So, again, to that, going back to what we were just talking about, that's where the first-round pick could come in handy, where, it could get the Clippers to consider that type of deal. And yeah, it would feel like, any of those two players would help the Heat, right? Like Luke Kennard shooting, Robert Covington's versatility.
Yeah, those are, for the most part, pretty good players you listed off. I know Covington's kind of polarizing, but Kennard, as we mentioned, they really need a shooter, and there's not many better than Kennard in the NBA right now.
Right. I doubt they'd move Marcus Morris. Obviously, with Powell, he's owed between 18 and 21 each of the next 3 years, but that's a 17, 18-point-a-game guy who shoots 39 or 40% on threes. So that's something that, even though you're absorbing some salary, would be interesting to me. And also, I think in that mix, you would include Nick Batum. He's in that soft salary spot where Batum and one of those other players, Covington, Kennard, Powell, would work. So would Reggie Jackson, who's on an expiring. Now, the Clippers signed Reggie Jackson thinking he would be their point guard this year, but they haven't been happy with him. He's had an okay year, not a great year, and so they've moved to Terrence Mann at point guard. So the Heat's ability to move Lowry could ultimately come down to, as Anthony said, maybe throwing in a first-round pick. And does Clippers brass believe that if they can't get Mike Conley, if they can't get Fred VanVleet, does Kyle Lowry, reunited with Kawhi Leonard, give us a better chance to make the NBA Finals than a Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann point guard combo?
So we're getting a little long here, so let's just kind of wrap things up. What are the predictions going into this weekend? I'm not asking you to guess who the Heat's trading, who they're trading for, but what's the course of action both of you guys think is most likely as we get into deadline day?
I think they will obviously explore a lot of different possibilities. I think trading Kyle Lowry is an avenue they'll explore as well, right? Like we just talked about, it makes sense for a lot of different reasons. I think there's two open roster spots. One of them will probably go to Orlando Robinson as far as converting his two-way deal to a standard contract. So then you have one left, and you have that room under the tax. So my prediction is they don't make another trade, which I know is not going to make fans happy. I just think it's going to be tough to trade Kyle at this point with what's going on with his knee. I think it's going to be tough to trade Duncan with his finger injury. And then after that, like we said, there aren't many salaries that can get you much. So my prediction is they don't really make another trade, and they sign somebody, whether it's a buyout or a free agent, to round out the roster after converting Orlando Robinson to a standard deal. And in regard to Kyle, Barry and I have spoken about this as well. You can make the argument he'll be more valuable in the summer, right? Where that salary obviously is a big one. It'll be expiring. So that makes him even more valuable than a guy like Duncan Robinson, who still has years left on his contract. Kyle will be expiring at that point. He could be a more valuable trade chip come June, July, or even into next season.
Anthony, that prediction is not going in the headline.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry about that. I wish I could come up with something more exciting, but I'm not, I'm boring. So,
Barry, what do you think?
I'll quickly wrap up by saying I know they're determined to get another 4 like they did with Crowder, which worked out,
Mm-hmm.
like Ariza, obviously, or, the one that didn't work out with Ariza a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But I just don't know the path with Dedmon's salary out of the mix, because as we led off this podcast by saying, how do you get to that $10-11 million range? Then you're talking about Strus and Vincent and Highsmith and Jovic, and it just leaves with too many open roster spots.
I was going to say, you already have 2 open roster spots. Yeah.
Right. Unless you can find someone in the smaller salary range like Jared Vanderbilt, like McDaniels from Charlotte, who's only at $1.8 million. So that would work if exchanged for a Struth or a Highsmith. But the salary issue is the one that makes this difficult to see them achieving something, even though they really want another 4 to share power forward with Caleb Martin. I do think they'll make every effort to move Lowry before the deadline. Whether it's successful, who knows? It's going to be a fascinating next day.
Do you guys have a favorite guy in that like Jared Vanderbilt class of the guy who they theoretically could get without like needing to shed half of their roster, basically?
I think it is Jared Vanderbilt.
Yeah, actually. Vanderbilt seems like the popular one these days.
And he's gonna. The problem for the Heat is he is going to be in demand, right? And it's
like he might cost you that first round pick.
Exactly, and then that's another question: is he worth that first round pick? So that's not going to be an easy one to land. But he would be the one I would point to as my favorite one. That's the best fit for what what this team needs and what it's looking for.
Yeah, and I'd be fine with Saric, who I threw out today.
Yep.
Obviously, he's played for Phoenix and Philly, but the $9 million salary is problematic from a cap standpoint. Olynyk, obviously, has done that, but you're comfortable with him. He has a skill that would be helpful. So I would say those two. A big who can score and who's actually big, right? Who can play center. Not one of these 6'5" power forwards that they've continued to bring in over the past few years, but someone in the 6'10" to 7 foot range who can shoot. You're not going to get someone like that who's a great defender as well, because those guys aren't being traded. So you just settle for the size, adequate rebounding.
Yeah, you're looking for 2 out of 3, right? Out of the shooting, size, defense. Like you're not ticking all the boxes, or you're trying to trade for Kevin Durant, basically. So,
but that's the problem, right? Like Kelly Olynyk would be a great fit. But $12.8 million, it's just tough. It's just tough for the Heat to get there with the contracts they have left to trade.
Yeah. All right, we can close things out there. As Barry said, it'll be a very interesting next. Well, by the time people are listening to this, I guess it'll just be about 10 hours until the deadline, depending when you listen to this. Heat obviously will play Wednesday night. As I said, if something crazy happens, we'll be back. But if not, you can follow Anthony on Twitter at Anthony_Chiang. Follow him throughout the day for deadline updates and reactions, obviously, to anything that goes down. Follow Barry Jackson on Twitter at FLA SportsBuzz. Same deal. He'll be on top of everything here on deadline day and moving forward as we see how the balance of power shifts in the Eastern Conference. We didn't mention Kyrie Irving once. I guess maybe we should end there, because that obviously doesn't matter specifically for the Heat, but him leaving the East, do you think that changes the Heat's calculus at all going into this trade deadline? Another team that has been ahead of them in the standings all year, looked like a title contender for a while there until Kevin Durant when Kevin Durant has been healthy, has looked like a title contender. Do you think that move changes the Heat's thoughts about how open the East might be?
No, because I still think Brooklyn and Milwaukee are the 2 teams they considered as like
in Boston, Milwaukee.
I mean, Boston, Milwaukee as like the top of the East, right? And Brooklyn was, like you said, they were on a little run there with Kevin Durant and Kyrie when they were both healthy. But I still think as long as Boston and Milwaukee are intact, it's just tough, right, for any other team to convince themselves that they could truly kind of win a series against one of those teams, unless they make a significant upgrade in the next few days.
And I'll add this one quick point. I think what it does do is it makes you even more motivated to get to 5, because if you get to 5, you are going to have a winnable first-round series against a Brooklyn team with only one superstar, or a Cleveland team that's a good team but lacks deep playoff experience.
Yeah, first year.
We already seen the Heat beat Cleveland there last Tuesday night, so I would be now even more motivated to get to 5, because that gives you a legitimate chance to at least get to round 2. I know Heat fans aren't going to be placated by merely going to round 2, but frankly, that might be as good as it gets this year.
I love how we're all still overlooking Philly, right? Like nobody.
I know Philly. They've been like the best team in the East
yeah.
for like the last 2 months, basically. But
third is likely for them now, if not 2.
Yeah.
With Brooklyn.
Not 2. I mean, I think they're, but they're going to be, I think, as aggressive as anyone at this deadline, right? That's the other problem is the Heat, as aggressive as they can be. Philly is probably going to be even more aggressive. 1, because of Daryl Morey. 2, because there's like kind of a desperation factor, I think, there, right? They haven't been to a conference finals with this group. Like they're trying to get over the hump finally. So, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces, I think, with those teams kind of right ahead of them in the East. That'll make the deadline, even if the Heat, like we said, maybe stands pat. It's going to be interesting. Anyway, thanks as always for listening, and we will talk to you guys next week.